She was the officer who believed in justice, even when others wouldn't. But when she uncovered proof of a criminal network inside her own department, he cuffed her and left her to die inside a sabotaged plane falling through a storm-torn sky. He thought the crash would silence her forever, but he never counted on a Navy SEAL on leave in the mountains. And he definitely never counted on the loyal German shepherd at his side, who heard her faint cry through the wind and would tear the world apart to protect her. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Cold rain hammered against the mountainside, turning the Seattle night into a sheet of silver needles driven by wind. Jake Nolan stood alone on the porch of a weather-worn cabin tucked against the slope, staring into the storm as if daring it to challenge him. Jake was 35, tall and built, with the compact strength of a man who had spent more time carrying rucksacks through deserts and jungles than sitting in chairs. His jaw was angular, darkened with a permanent shadow of stubble, and a faint scar cut diagonally from the edge of his brow to the bridge of his nose, earned years ago in a dusty alley overseas when an explosion introduced him to mortality much too close. His steel-gray eyes, framed beneath brows that always seemed to carry silent weight, were the eyes of a man who had seen life and loss in equal measure. Jake was on leave, though leave wasn't the right word. He wasn't resting. He was hiding from the world, from the guilt of losing his mentor on a mission that went sideways. He came here to the mountains to sort through the man's belongings and, maybe, the wreckage of himself. At his side sat Ranger. Ranger was a 4-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and a broad, intelligent head. His fur was thick and coarse, with darker streaks along his spine like smudges of charcoal. Unlike Jake, Ranger did not understand grief, but he understood loyalty, and that was enough. His posture was proud, back straight, ears erect, tail relaxed, but ready. Ranger had been trained alongside SEAL teams to track, detect explosives, and guard with unwavering focus. He was a warrior, but right now, he simply rested his head against Jake's thigh, sensing the storm brewing outside, and the storm inside the man he considered his pack. Thunder cracked. Not thunder. An unnatural metallic shriek tore through the rain. Jake's body froze. That sound didn't belong to nature. Ranger bolted first, springing to his feet, head high, ears pinned toward the sky. Then Jake heard it clearly, an engine choking, coughing through the downpour, followed by a violent metallic groan like a wing being torn apart. A faint flicker of red light crossed the tree line. A plane, going down. Jake didn't think. Instinct kicked in. He grabbed a flashlight and his emergency medical pack from the hooks beneath the door. Ranger was already racing down the trail, paws pounding against mud, tail straight back like an arrow. Jake sprinted after him, boots sliding over soaked pine needles as lightning sketched jagged bones across the sky. The smell hit first. Fuel, scorched metal, and ozone. The plane had plowed into the slope nose first and skidded, carving a trench through earth and moss. One wing was snapped clean, hanging from a torn pine by shredded aluminum and prayer. The fuselage steamed in the cold, rain sizzling against hot metal. Inside, a woman was bound to the pilot seat. Olivia Reed. Jake didn't know her name yet, but she was unforgettable at first sight, early 30s, lean, with the athletic build of someone accustomed to running toward danger. Her hair, dark chestnut and shoulder length, was plastered across her cheeks, soaked in rain and streaked with dirt. Her skin was pale from blood loss, freckles dusting across her nose. Her face was delicate, but her jaw carried a stubbornness that hinted she had never been the type to step back from a fight. Her uniform shirt, patched with the emblem of the Seattle Police Department, was torn across the shoulder. Blood seeped through the fabric at her thigh where a shard of metal still protruded. And most alarming of all, her wrists were handcuffed to the seat frame, not buckled, cuffed. Her chest rose and fell shallowly. Jake placed 2 fingers against her carotid artery and felt a heartbeat, weak, uneven, racing with fear even in unconsciousness. Ranger nudged Jake with his snout, signaling something behind them. Jake angled his flashlight toward the rear of the plane. In a carrier meant for canine transport, 3 small German shepherd puppies huddled together, 6 or 7 weeks old, little paws trembling from shock and cold. Their fur was soft, more fluff than coat, ears not fully lifted yet. One, the smallest, tilted its head at Jake, eyes huge and uncertain, as if asking whether the nightmare was over. Ranger approached them and sniffed gently. The puppies instantly recognized a protector and pressed together, small bodies leaning into Ranger's reassuring warmth. Jake turned back to the cockpit. The pilot seat was empty, the harness hung loose, the emergency door on the side was open, and from the frame fluttered a cut piece of parachute tether, waving like a taunting flag. Someone had left her to die. Jake's pulse surged, not panic, but fury. It was the familiar, focused anger that once carried him through fire and gunfights, the kind that sharpened his mind rather than clouded it. He examined the handcuffs securing Olivia, not police cuffs, tactical steel, double-locked. She hadn't crashed by accident. Someone wanted her silenced. Jake yanked out his multi-tool, sawed through plastic around the frame, and freed her wrist from the chair rather than wasting precious seconds trying to pick the cuffs in place. The moment her body shifted, Olivia groaned, hoarse, weak, desperate. He leaned close, steadying her bleeding leg and keeping her airway clear. Internally, something cracked open in Jake. Not pity, he'd never allowed himself that, but responsibility. Somewhere between losing his mentor and losing himself, he had forgotten what purpose felt like. Saving her wasn't optional, it was instinct. Rain pounded harder, rouge flames inside the engine flickered. Fuel leak. He had minutes, maybe. He swept Olivia into his arms. She was light, nearly limp against his chest, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, breath short and uneven. Ranger guided the path, moving ahead through undergrowth, tail stiff, scanning the darkness for anything out of place. Halfway up the muddy incline, Jake slipped. The ground sucked at his boots like a living thing determined to drag him backward. He shifted Olivia's weight higher against him and dug his heels into the earth. Every muscle in his back burned. Ranger returned, nudged Jake's leg, growled, not at him, but for him, pushing him forward. At last, the cabin came into view, faint light glowing through rain-blurred windows. Jake carried Olivia inside. Ranger returned, teeth gently gripping the handle of the puppy's carrier and dragging it through the doorway, tail stiff with effort. Jake closed the heavy wood door behind them, shutting out the storm. Only then, as silence replaced thunder and heartbeats began to slow, did Jake realize the truth. He had not just pulled strangers from a crash, he had been pulled back into war. The storm pressed against the cabin walls like a living creature testing for weakness, but inside, the air was thick with warmth from the wood stove, and a tension neither silence nor fire could soften. Jake Nolan worked in steady, controlled movements, the way someone moves when they've learned to bury panic under layers of discipline. Olivia Reed lay unconscious on the leather-patched couch he had dragged close to the fire. Her breathing was shallow but steady, cheeks flushed from shock and blood loss. Her dark hair clung to her temples, still damp from the rain, and the torn fabric of her uniform revealed bruises beginning to surface. The metal cuff still encircled her left wrist. Jake had been forced to cut the chair frame around it, not the cuff itself. Removing it would require tools he didn't have here, and even if he did, he suspected ripping it off immediately might aggravate her injury. Ranger lay at the foot of the couch, his thick sable coat glowing amber in the flickering lantern light, eyes pinned to Olivia's face, as though guarding a fragile truth. Occasionally he shifted, shoulders tightening whenever Jake moved too quickly, or Olivia's breathing hitched. 3 small German shepherd puppies stayed close in a tangle of fur near Olivia's hip, tucked beneath a thick flannel blanket. They were tiny, barely 7 weeks old, with soft rounded paws and ears that hadn't quite decided whether to stand straight or flop sideways. Jake knelt beside them and checked for injuries. All 3 pups appeared intact, frightened, dehydrated, a little too thin, but unharmed. Ranger sniffed them one by one, tail stiff and alert, adopting some strange paternal seriousness, as if he suddenly understood these were members of his pack now. "You 3 didn't ask for any of this," Jake murmured, though no one was awake to hear him. He reached for the smallest pup, a female with a white splash across her chest and softer fur than the others. She had been trembling earlier, and he wanted to make sure shock wasn't setting in. When he lifted her, he noticed something odd. Her collar was thicker and heavier than the others, and beneath the nylon outer layer, something hard pressed against his thumb. He turned it over, confusion narrowing his gaze. The collar wasn't normal. It had a hidden seam, not sewn, melted closed. Ranger, sensing Jake's rigid focus, leaned in to inspect. Jake retrieved his multi-tool and delicately split the seam down one side. A tiny compartment slid out, no larger than the nail of his thumb. Inside was a waterproof micro USB drive. His pulse jumped, an old instinct roaring back. He had seen too much to believe this was an accident. This wasn't some sentimental keepsake. This was intentional. Someone hid something here. Before he could examine it further, Olivia stirred. A quiet, ragged inhale scraped past her throat. Jake moved to her side as her eyelids fluttered, slow at first, then snapping wide with confusion and panic. She jerked away from the couch, instinctively trying to sit up. Ranger stepped forward, body low and still, not threatening, just ready. Olivia recoiled when the cuff on her wrist tugged against the blanket, her breath catching in pain and memory. Jake raised one steady hand, voice calm, controlled, the tone of a man who had soothed panicked soldiers before. "You're safe," he said simply. No explanation, no demand, just truth. Olivia blinked through dizziness, vision refocusing on him. Jake looked like someone carved from mountain stone. Tall, broad-shouldered flannel shirt, stretched across a chest built from work, not vanity. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes revealed a discipline that never turned off, even here in a remote cabin. She swallowed. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, roughened by fear and dehydration. Jake brought a metal cup of warm water to her lips and steadied her trembling hand as she drank. "About a mile up from where your plane went down," he answered. "You were handcuffed. The pilot's gone. I followed the crash." She closed her eyes as memories began to flicker like shards of broken glass. She remembered boarding the plane with Marcus Bishop, her superior officer, her mentor, a man respected by every cop in her precinct. She remembered his calm voice, the way he leaned close to speak over the engine noise. Then she remembered the shift in his eyes, calm turning into contempt. A gun, a click of metal, the cuffs slamming shut. Olivia's pulse spiked. Jake watched her, waiting, not pushing. She finally whispered, "He didn't crash, he jumped." Jake nodded once. Parachute line was still hanging from the fuselage. She found Ranger staring at her with unwavering focus. "And that's your dog?" Jake shook his head. "No, he's his own dog. I just keep up." The response, stated with dry finality, would have made her laugh under different circumstances. Jake placed the puppy with the collar into her lap. "This was on her," he said. "Hidden compartment. You're doing?" Olivia's lips trembled, not from fear, but from something thinner deeper, fury. "I didn't know where else to hide it." Her fingers brushed the collar, and the restraint in her voice cracked. "Marcus searched everything on me, my pockets, my jacket, but he didn't check the dog's." Jake studied her face. "What's on it?" Olivia closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. Her fear hardened into resolve. Proof of a trafficking network, using impound planes, cops, supervisors, judges. Marcus was the one signing release orders. I found inconsistencies and traced them. Then I downloaded everything I could gather onto that. She looked down at the pup. "I hoped if I didn't survive, the dogs might." Jake slotted the USB back into the collar without a word. He didn't need more explanation. He didn't need proof. The way she spoke, steady despite pain, told him everything about who she was. Olivia Reed was more than a victim. She was dangerous because she had the courage to see the truth. A gust slammed against the cabin, rattling the shutters. Ranger stiffened and walked toward the window. Jake's voice lowered. "Until your leg stabilizes, you're not moving from that couch." Olivia looked at the puppies, curled into her side as if they had always belonged there. Her gaze softened. "If Marcus realizes the data wasn't destroyed..." She didn't finish the sentence. Jake didn't need her to. "Let him try," he said. The storm intensified outside, but inside Jake felt something unexpected. Purpose. The kind he thought he had buried with his mentor. Ranger pressed against Jake's leg. Olivia pressed her palm against the cold cuff still locked around her wrist. The puppies slept, unaware that the smallest among them carried enough truth to burn a system to ash. Somewhere in the darkness, a man who betrayed her believed she was dead. He would learn otherwise. The storm had delivered Olivia Reed to Jake Nolan, and Jake wasn't the sort of man who let fate down. Fog crawled across the mountainside like a slow-breathing animal, wrapping the cabin in a pale shroud that blurred edges and swallowed sound. Jake Nolan stood near the single narrow window, his silhouette a dark statue against the lantern glow, watching the sky through the gap between storm shutters. Ranger pressed against his leg, tail low, ears angled forward with a tension that vibrated through every muscle in his body. The puppies slept in a woven basket near the stove, tiny bodies rising and falling beneath a flannel blanket. Olivia Reed lay on the couch, half sitting up now, pain and adrenaline sharpening her awareness. She watched Jake lean closer to the window, jaw tightening, as the distant rhythm of helicopter blades pulsed overhead like a mechanical heartbeat. The helicopter was small and maneuverable, an MD-500, the kind used by civilian contractors, not law enforcement search and rescue. Jake recognized the flight pattern instantly, contour flying, hugging the terrain instead of rising above it. That alone made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Jake had used that tactic overseas when hunting insurgents. Now it was being used against them. A beam of white light swept across the treetops, probing through fog as though peeling back layers of secrecy. Inside the cabin, Olivia gripped the edge of the couch. She felt exposed, like prey. Her pulse raced as memories jolted back in fragments. Marcus Bishop leaning toward her in the plane, his face carved in false concern. The glint of metal before he snapped the cuff around her wrist. The sudden sharpness of betrayal. She had known Marcus for 5 years. He was tall, broad-chested, early 40s, with precise brown hair and a smile that disarmed even the most defensive witness. His posture always relaxed, hands tucked casually in his pants pockets, the approachable lieutenant. Yet beneath that polished veneer was a man like hollow marble, impressive from afar, empty on the inside. Marcus never took risks unless he could benefit. He never forgave being challenged. And Olivia had challenged him by following the trail of missing evidence, falsified impound logs, and planes that disappeared from the system. He chose to erase her rather than let her speak. That realization cracked something inside her. Jake's voice broke the silence. That pilot isn't searching for survivors. He's looking for heat signatures. He turned away from the window. In that movement, Olivia caught something new. Calculation, not panic. Preparation. There was a shift in him, the slow rewinding of a spring, the silent click of a trigger being set. Someone put that crash exactly where they wanted it, Jake continued, keeping his voice low. And now they want to finish what they started. Olivia's throat tightened. Marcus. Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. Olivia pushed herself upright, clutching her bandaged leg. The cuff still locked on her wrist was a cold reminder of her captor. He thinks I'm dead, she whispered. He thinks the data died with me. Jake crossed to the puppies. He lifted the smallest, the pup with the secret inside her collar, and set her gently into Olivia's lap. He doesn't know you outsmarted him, Jake said. That's leverage. Olivia stroked the pup's fur. The contact centered her more than any deep breath could. That's also a death sentence if he finds out. Ranger suddenly stiffened near the window, low growl rumbling through the floorboards. The helicopter's floodlight passed over the cabin, just a brush of white against the grain of the shutters, then continued down the hillside. But Jake knew better than to relax. A helicopter never makes only one pass. Jake checked the lantern fuel, the position of his medical kit, the door latches, the generator switches. Everything was methodical, every movement clean and efficient. Living alone in this cabin had forced him into routine, predictable, structured, controlled. But that routine cracked when Olivia entered the picture. Purpose reached into him again, reshaping instinct into strategy. Olivia watched him move. You've done this before, she said quietly. Jake paused. Too many times. Protecting strangers? Protecting whoever needs protecting. He didn't say that losing his mentor 6 months ago during a botched extraction had left a vacuum inside him, a hollowness that swallowed sleep. Ranger nudged his hand, pulling him back from thoughts he didn't care to revisit. Olivia tried to stand. Pain shot through her leg, but her expression hardened with determination. I'm not dead weight, she insisted. I can help. Jake turned toward her. His expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes shifted. He saw fire, the same kind that lived in soldiers who refused to quit. You help, he said, by staying alive. The helicopter returned, closer. The beam of light hit the cabin directly this time, sliding across the shutters like a searchlight across prison bars. Ranger barked once, sharp and low. Jake killed the lantern with one flick. The room plunged into darkness. The helicopter hovered overhead, wind forcing the fog to churn. Jake motioned Olivia and the pups toward a back corner of the cabin. Ranger stood in front of them, body forming a solid barrier. From above came the distant crackle of radio chatter. A man's voice, distorted but unmistakable, threaded through the static. Visual possible. Go thermal. Jake didn't breathe, neither did Olivia. Thermal meant heat signatures. If they relinquished silence, they were done. The light swept across the cabin once more, slower this time, like a blade caressing the skin before cutting. Then the helicopter veered away. The sudden absence of noise was deafening. Olivia released a shaking breath. "Why is he sending a helicopter?" "Because," Jake said, "he can't risk showing up himself until he knows whether you're alive." Olivia swallowed. The weight of that truth pressed into her ribs. A new sound began, faint, distant, far below the cabin. Tires on gravel, an engine being cut. The real danger wasn't in the sky anymore. Someone was on the ground. Jake moved to the gun safe in the corner. The safe was heavy steel, dented from travel and age. He spun the dial with practiced precision. Inside rested a compact AR-15, magazines, and a .45 pistol. He checked the rifle, chambered a round, and slung it over his shoulder. Ranger's ears twitched toward the door. Olivia clutched the puppy against her chest. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. "He sent scouts." Olivia's heartbeat thundered in her throat. Jake nodded toward her. "Stay down. Stay silent." Outside, footsteps crunched, slow, testing. The cabin had become the center of a hunt, and they were done running. Rain hammered the tin roof like a drumline, masking the subtle noises that mattered. Boots crushing wet gravel, weapons brushing against jackets, hushed curses swallowed by storm. Jake Nolan pressed his back to the cold interior wall of the cabin, his breathing steady and silent. His pulse didn't rise. Instead, everything inside him narrowed into clean, sharp focus. The dormant part of him, buried beneath grief and self-imposed isolation, clicked awake with terrifying ease. The warrior was back. Outside, Ranger stood rigid near the front door, fur bristling, tail stiff as a gun barrel. The German shepherd didn't bark. This wasn't the bark of warning, it was the silence of an apex predator tasting threat. Olivia Reed sat propped against the stone fireplace, one leg bandaged, handcuffs still attached to her wrist. Her face was pale but not weak. Her honey-brown eyes tracked Jake with a steadiness born not of calm, but defiance. The smallest pup curled against her side, while the other two pressed against Ranger's flank. Instinct told them safety was shaped like Jake. Jake flipped off the last lantern. The cabin plunged into darkness. Outside, engines cut. Then only the storm spoke. Jake whispered, barely audible, 3 of them. Ranger shifted, quiet, lethal. Olivia swallowed. "How do you know?" "Different footfall weights, 2 heavier, 1 light. One drags his heel, old knee injury." Olivia stared. Jake could read people through sound. He wasn't guessing, he knew. Through the fog, 3 figures emerged. The first was Vince Harlow, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, beard trimmed into a sharp point. He wore a tactical rain jacket and held a silenced carbine. Harlow had once served in private contract security overseas. The lines in his face told the truth of that life. His eyes were black, shark-like, empty of hesitation. If he had ever cared about right or wrong, the war stripped it from him. Beside him moved Ethan Cole, younger, early 30s, lean to the point of wiry. His blonde hair was buzzed short, and his movements carried nervous precision. Ethan's PTSD was an open secret. Small tremors in his fingers, eyes darting as if expecting violence to rise from the mud itself. Fear drove him, not loyalty. The third man lagged behind, Marcus Bishop. When he stepped into the clearing, the storm seemed to bend around him. Tall, uniform tailored to perfection, rain sliding off his black tactical coat. Marcus carried arrogance the way other people carried oxygen. His salt and pepper hair stayed immaculately combed even in rain. His handsome features looked carved from authority itself. If one didn't know his rot, they might mistake him for a leader instead of a parasite feeding on power. In his gloved hand, he held a suppressed pistol, idling like a promise. Harlow spoke first, voice low. Thermals ping heat inside. 1 adult, 1 large K9, heat signatures too small to classify. Marcus's jaw ticked. The cop is alive. She shouldn't be. Jake watched them through a slit between shutters. He saw how Marcus positioned himself behind the others, not out of fear, but ego. Others did the dirty work. Jake moved silently across the cabin, collecting gear he had prepared. Thick rope, spare nails, a length of weighted paracord. He hadn't fought for a long time, but his body remembered. This cabin wasn't a trap. It was home turf. He whispered to Ranger, "Guard! Ranger nudged Olivia, positioning himself between her and the door. Jake slipped into the back of the cabin and slid out into the storm through a shadow-covered exit. Rain swallowed him. Harlow approached the door, gun raised. Jake had already tied the heavy climbing rope to the porch beam and looped it to a tree trunk. When Harlow stepped on the rope, Jake yanked hard. Harlow's feet flew out from under him. His head slammed into the porch post with a dull crack. Ethan gasped, stepping back. Marcus didn't flinch. Jake dragged Harlow into the shadows, one hand clamped over the man's mouth, while the other delivered a sharp chokehold. Seconds later, Harlow went limp. Jake stripped his radio, pocketed ammo, and ghosted back toward the cabin wall. Ethan breathed fast. "That wasn't wind," Marcus responded, voice ice. "Then be useful." He pushed Ethan forward like a sacrifice. Ethan crept toward the window, gripping his pistol. His hand shook. Lightning flashed, just enough for Jake to see his fear twist into panic. Jake hurled a handful of gravel at the far side of the cabin. Ethan spun and fired wildly into the dark. 3 wasted rounds. Jake appeared behind him, silent as breath, one arm locked around Ethan's neck, the other covering his mouth. "Easy," Jake muttered, too soft to be heard by anyone but the dying man. "Your war should have ended a long time ago." Ethan sagged, unconscious but alive. Marcus remained. Inside the cabin, Olivia heard only silence outside. Silence was worse than gunfire. Her leg throbbed. Fear clawed her ribcage, but beneath it burned something sharper, a refusal to die on someone else's terms. The smallest puppy whimpered. Olivia stroked her head. "We're okay," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. The front door creaked. Marcus entered without hesitation. He didn't sneak, he announced. Cold mist swirled around him. "Olivia," he called softly, almost sweetly, "I know you're here." He saw her handcuffed wrist glint in the faint moonlight. Marcus approached slowly, pistol raised. "You should have stayed dead." Ranger launched. A blur of muscle and fangs, Ranger slammed into him, knocking Marcus backward. The gun fired, a muffled thud, burying a round into the cabin wall. Marcus screamed as teeth closed on his forearm. Jake crashed through the back door, rifle leveled. Rainwater streamed down his face. Mud clung to his clothes. He looked wild and alive. Marcus reached with his free hand, fumbling for a second weapon. Jake fired once, hitting the pistol and sending it skittering across the floor. Marcus staggered, bleeding, trapped between Ranger's jaws and Jake's aim. "I gave you a career," Marcus spat at Olivia. "I offered you the world." Olivia met his gaze, voice steady. "You offered me chains." Ranger released only when Jake spoke one word. "Off." Marcus collapsed, clutching his arm. Jake lifted the USB collar in his hand, not triumphantly, but as final proof. Marcus's face crumpled when he realized what was inside. "It's over," Jake said. "No," Marcus rasped. "It's only over if no one finds your bodies." Jake struck him once, swift and clean. Marcus fell unconscious. The storm outside began to break. Inside the cabin, silence returned. Not empty, but victorious. The chapter closed not on a gunshot, but on a heartbeat. 3 small ones in a basket, 1 fierce in the dark, and 2 fragile yet steady on the couch. They weren't prey anymore. They were a team. Morning light crept over the ridge slowly, as if unsure whether the night had truly ended. Mist lifted from the wet earth, curling upward like breath rising from a sleeping giant. Inside the cabin, the aftermath of the battle lingered. Splintered wood on the porch, a dark stain where Marcus had fallen, the smell of rain mixing uneasily with gunpowder. But within that fragile stillness, another scent began to bloom. Relief. Jake Nolan stood near the front door, shoulders squared, although exhaustion weighed on every muscle. His shirt was torn, smeared with dried mud and streaks of Marcus's blood. Jake's face, sharp jaw, scar over the bridge of his nose, carried the expression of someone who had walked through fire and refused to be burned. Even now, after the fight, his gray eyes remained alert. His hands rested lightly on the AR-15, not clinging to it, but unwilling to put it down until the world confirmed it was safe. Ranger sat rigid beside him, chest wide and proud, fur still damp but eyes glowing a fierce amber. The dog's posture was precise, head held high, tail still but not tense, the stance of a victor guarding his pack. His muzzle bore smudges of dried blood, no longer warm but now a medal earned. Instinct told Ranger the danger was gone, but loyalty kept him at Jake's side all the same. Olivia Reed stirred on the couch, bathed in soft sunlight. She had fallen asleep leaning against the pile of blankets Jake arranged beneath her. Her dark hair fell messily around her shoulders, freed from the storm's wet grip. Her face seemed calmer, freer, though the cuffs still glinted against her wrist, until Jake had finally freed her, using pliers from a toolbox at dawn. The angry red bruise around her wrist testified to everything she had survived. Her bandaged thigh throbbed, but pain meant something today. It meant she was alive. The puppy sprawled across Ranger's front paws. The smallest pup, the one who carried the hidden USB, slept belly up, tiny legs twitching as if she dreamed of running across a field she had never seen. A deep mechanical thump echoed through the valley, helicopter blades. This time not a predator, but rescue. A dark green UH-60 Blackhawk cut through the thinning fog. Jake stepped onto the porch, raising one arm to signal. He stood tall despite fatigue, silhouette outlined against the rising sun. The chopper descended onto the gravel clearing, sending debris swirling. Out stepped Captain Miriam Hayes. Captain Hayes was in her mid-50s, with hair cropped close in a practical silver bob and sharp cheekbones that hinted at an athletic youth not yet surrendered to age. Her posture radiated authority. Even rain couldn't put wrinkles in her uniform. Her boots hit the earth with purpose as she crossed toward the cabin. Hayes was the type of woman who built careers out of unflinching truth. She had spent 25 years in the Washington State Patrol, specializing in corruption exposure, earning the nickname Hayes the Scalpel because she cut rot out of systems without mercy. Her dark eyes scanned the cabin, and when they landed on Olivia, her expression softened, but only slightly. "Officer Reed?" Hayes's voice carried wind and grit. Olivia blinked, struggling to sit up straighter. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes approached her slowly, then knelt so they were eye level. "We received an encrypted distress call from this location. Said you had evidence." Her gaze flicked to the collar around the puppy's neck. Jake handed Hayes the micro USB. He didn't use words. He didn't need to. Hayes held the drive as if it were a detonator. "This is enough to bury careers," she said quietly. "Not just Marcus Bishop's." Olivia inhaled. "It's the truth." Hayes nodded once, not in approval, but in acknowledgement. "Then we'll handle it from here." Paramedics moved past them into the cabin. A tall medic with a neatly trimmed red beard and freckles, Tom Renner, mid-20s, cheerful energy despite the serious situation, approached Olivia. His uniform was slightly oversized on his lanky frame, and a pair of small round glasses perched precariously on his nose. Tom was the kind of medic who talked nervously to fill silence, not realizing his chatter was its own form of reassurance. "Let's take a look at that leg," he said, already preparing fresh bandages. "And don't worry, this isn't my first bullet wound, though I'd really prefer if people stopped making it a habit in the mountains." Despite exhaustion, Olivia smiled. Jake stayed back, letting others work. Ranger sat beside him, now allowing one of the crew to stroke his head. The puppies woke, tumbling toward the medic with excitement, tiny tails wagging wildly. Tom laughed, nearly losing his balance. Okay, who's the tiny troublemaker?" The smallest pup barked, proud. The wind shifted and carried away the last trace of gunpowder. Hayes rose to full height and turned to Jake. "You the one who made the call?" Jake nodded. "You Navy?" "Was." He paused. "Paperwork's pending." Hayes studied him, eyes narrowing with recognition, not of face, but of type. There's always a place for people who run toward danger instead of away from it. "I'm not looking for another war," Jake replied. Ranger pressed closer to him, confirming the truth of that statement. Weeks passed. Marcus Bishop's crimes hit the news like a hammer blow. Headlines named him as the architect of a criminal pipeline: impounded planes, illegal drugs, falsified evidence, corrupt judges. Several officers under his command were suspended, others arrested. Olivia's name was cleared publicly. She attended the court hearing with Jake sitting quietly behind her, Ranger at his boots. Hayes submitted the USB as Exhibit A. Justice was noisy. Healing was quiet. 3 months later, spring light spilled across the valley in a gold that reminded Jake of desert sunsets. Except here, the air smelled of pine and damp soil instead of sand. The cabin was no longer a place of isolation. It was a beginning. Jake, hair now slightly longer, beard trimmed shorter, walked across a small fenced training field behind the cabin. A newly painted sign stood near the gate: Pacific Rescue, K-9 Training Center, Nolan and Ranger. Ranger trotted proudly beside him, harness fitted snugly across his muscular frame. The puppies had grown. Each now had a distinct personality. The smallest, the girl, named Nova, sharp-eyed and graceful, fastest learner. The second, Scout, clumsy but enthusiastic, obsessed with carrying sticks double his size. The third, Echo, calm and thoughtful, always watching before acting. They trained under Ranger, mimicking his posture and movements. And Olivia? She stood near the porch, leaning lightly on her healed leg. Her hair was longer now, waves catching the spring light. The bruise from the handcuffs had faded. So had the nightmares. She watched Jake and Ranger with a softness she never allowed herself before. Jake approached her when training ended. Ranger flopped onto the grass, panting. "You staying in Seattle?" Jake asked. Olivia held his gaze. "Only if you do." Jake smiled, not the distant, polite smile of a man surviving, but the real one of someone choosing to live. "I already am," Ranger barked, as if sealing a contract. Nova charged toward Jake, paws clumsy in her excitement, and Olivia laughed. Jake reached for her hand, hesitating only once, but Olivia completed the motion, fingers intertwining with his. The storm was long behind them. The sky was impossibly clear. They were no longer running, they were home. When life pushes us into storms we never asked for, God sometimes sends help in unexpected forms. A loyal dog, a brave stranger, a moment of courage we didn't know we had. Miracles don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as new beginnings. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God protect you and your family through every dark night until your sunrise comes.